Good morning, Dan and Amy. He has been writing a number of provocative pieces, as is his wont. He is Victor Davis Hanson, and we're always pleased to have him on the show. National Review columnist, senior fellow for the Hoover Institute, and his new book, The Second World Wars, How the First Global Conflict Was Fought and Won. Victor Davis Hanson, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So one of the pieces I'd like to start with of yours was essentially suggesting that Donald Trump is a bit of political nitroglycerin. It's handled with care, and the way that the administrative state and some of the senior leadership of law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies and Mueller and the congressional Democrats have gone after him may have the effect of exploding on them, and it seems to be that what you're describing is happening, at least in part. Kim Strassel reporting in the Wall Street Journal today about that latest, greatest, top secret FBI source and what the FBI was trying to hold from scrutiny, congressional scrutiny, turns out to, again, be a situation of them just trying to hide embarrassing things about what they were and were not doing in the 2016 election. And so just to kind of develop the argument that you make about how this has the potential to boomerang against all of the allied enemies of the president.
Well, I think I wanted to make 2 points. One, Donald Trump is the first president that has neither prior military service or political office, so he's not invested in think tanks, National Review commentary, Weekly Standard editors. He's not invested in former politicians, the entire world. So when he does something and they react to it, he's got nothing to lose. They do have things to lose because they're fish that swim in that water. So that's sort of a liberating experience. So when they tell him, all of these experts, you can't move the embassy, you just can't do it to Jerusalem, you just can't leave the Paris Accord, you just can't cut a deal with North Korea, you just can't get out of the Iran deal. He wants to know why you can't, because he looks at the situation as a businessman in Manhattan empirically, and whose interest is it and whose is not. The second issue is that I think everybody in Washington not only thought Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, but they invested into it. And by that I mean, if you're Loretta Lynch, you meet on the tarmac with Bill Clinton why his spouse is under investigation, because you think that you'll be rewarded in the next administration. If you're James Comey, you can fudge to Congress, you can mislead a FISA court. If you're Andrew McCabe, you can lie to investigators. If you're Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, whatever it is, all of the behavior that we feel now is criminal or quasi-criminal, at the time it was committed, or people felt that it was not only not criminal, or even if it was criminal, they didn't care, but it was behavior to be rewarded. And I think that's one way of looking at it. And then finally, Mueller has an investigation that was mandated to look at collusion. After a year, I don't think anybody on either side of the aisle believes there was Trump-Russian collusion. But as he proceeds, he establishes precedents. You can't lie to an FBI investigator in the case of Michael Flynn, allegedly. So Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin, we know, did. You cannot leak, or you should not leak damaging information. We know that James Comey did. We know that Andrew McCabe did. We know that people in the Mueller investigation did. You cannot collude with Russia. We know that the Clinton campaign bought a dossier that was produced by a foreign subject, a British subject, Christopher Steele, who probably bought Russian sources for it. So the larger point is that inadvertently Mueller is establishing these precedents that there is criminal exposure, but it's not where he thinks it is. It's on the other side, and that's going to be very hard just to ignore.
Do you think President Trump has gotten enough applause and appreciation? I mean, he has had a great week. 3 freed hostages. That summit, the date and time is set up for Kim Jong-un to meet in Singapore, on June 12th, and then pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, I think we haven't seen anybody do that, but even more importantly, we've never had below 4% unemployment this century, and we've never had, we're going to have 4 consecutive quarters of 3% GDP growth. Remember, Larry Summers said that was a fairy tale. You couldn't obtain it. and that's on top of business confidence, record minority employment. And so people are, and you can see it. I mean, we don't just have to cite statistics. I'm talking to you from the center of the San Joaquin Valley, an economically depressed area, and the change is miraculous. I mean, I see signs that say truckers wanted, welders wanted, tilers wanted. If you talk to landscapers, they cannot get people, and they're raising the rates. The whole conversation in California about a mandatory minimum wage has just vanished because it's being exceeded by desperate employers. And the beneficiaries are a lot of times second and third generation Mexican American people who do not compete so much against illegal aliens. And with a booming economy, they're the only game in town for these really great jobs, and people notice it. And the weird thing is that has not yet translated into the type of polls that you'd expect any president would achieve once he had that record. It's starting to inch up, but that there's this resistance, and when you have 90% of the media negative, there's going to be a lag time before he gets credit for it.
But even with all of that, you still have, as several people, respected commentators of a conservative bent have said, including your colleague at National Review, Andy McCarthy, you still have this prospect that a prostitute could take down a president, Stormy Daniels, and everything around her, and Michael Cohen, and so forth. And you still have President Trump having to navigate this tete-a-tete, forthcoming tete-a-tete with Bob Mueller. And so, how do you view that in the context of Trump's performance thus far?
Has the most amazing commercial.
Yeah, I think what we're witnessing is we're leaving the realm of legality and entering politics with the Mueller investigation. And that's really, with all due respect to Mueller, that was his problem. He didn't have to pick the team he did that had people not only from his own law firm, but had predominantly been either Democratic or gave money to Hillary Clinton's campaign, or had represented, in fact, members in that were involved in the email scandal. So what I'm saying is he didn't build public support for that. He's below 50% now in a confidence rating. And so whether he likes it or not, people are saying what a person did 10 years ago is his own business. And if he had a non-disclosure agreement, which is perfectly legal, or he has sort of out of a Michael Cohen fixer who wanted to profit, that happens in politics. Trump's problem is that he's so sensitive and he's narcissistic. He should have just said, I made mistakes in the past, but I haven't made mistakes that rise to the criminal level, and that would have been the end of it.
I mean, don't
but
you
I
think
still
people...
think it's not going to go anywhere.
Sorry for interrupting. Don't you think people still would have voted for him if he came out and said, yes, I had an affair with a porn star. I've apologized to my wife for, that was 10 years ago. But now it's the cover-up's worse than the crime.
Yeah, it was all calibrated into his candidacy, and everybody knew what type of person he was. And they knew he didn't play by the Marquess of Queensberry rules as a politician, and they knew that people in that type of landscape that he operated in do certain things that don't go down well with most Americans. That said, he should have been much more forthcoming, but I don't think that anything he's done now, it rises to the level of a illegality, and especially because Mueller is, again, I want to emphasize that, when you have allegations that the FBI had embedded people within a political campaign, or you have allegations that the UN ambassador 260 times requested names in surveilled transcripts to be unmasked, or you have names that the FBI director and Ron Rosenstein went to a FISA court and did not tell them that a dossier that was a primary evidence to get a writ to spy on Americans was not verified, that the author had been severed with a relationship from FBI and was paid for by Hillary Clinton. So there's so much exposure there, and the Americans are starting to slowly absorb it all. And as they absorb it all, we start to see people say that the Mueller investigation, the time has come. It's not going to find anything. It may go into Michael Cohen's office. It may go after Paul Manafort, but it's going to run into public opinion. It's going to run into some federal judges, and it's going to run especially into greater criminal exposure by other people who were invested in the Trump defeat in 2016.
Harry Truman is credited with saying there's nothing new in this world. It's just the history you don't know. And you have a piece in National Review suggesting that Truman may have been the proto-Trump. So we're a bit of a replay of history in terms of the kind of president that Trump is. We've seen it before. There's some parallels. And I, as a historian, I always enjoy your perspective on these things and look forward to holding up a Chicago Tribune that says Harris defeats Trump in 2020, only to have that Trump victorious. So the parallels between Truman and Trump.
Well, there are many. Harry Truman should have never been president. He was only president by an accident. And that is, Henry Wallace was on the ticket when Roosevelt was very sick for his fourth term. He frightened people, so they put this obscure senator on there. And then Roosevelt died in April of 45. But more interesting, Truman had far more baggage than Trump does. He was embedded in the Pendergrass machine in Kansas City. Everybody knew that. That's why he had not been able to run for any higher office than Senate. And yet when he came in, he was very foul-mouthed. He played poker. He drank. He went after people. He threatened a critic that had trashed his own daughter's musical recital and threatened him with physical violence. He said Tom Dewey was an agent of fascism and was going to reproduce Nazism in the United States. And yet, he didn't care about public or even establishment consensus. He fired Douglas MacArthur. He started the CIA. He saved South Korea. He recognized Israel, dropped the atomic bomb. He started the idea of containment against the wishes of the former Roosevelt holdovers. So he was an iconoclast. He was sort of a freelancer, and he left office with the second lowest rating of any president since Richard Nixon. But I should say until Richard Nixon had 22. I think Truman had 32%. So he was always unpopular. He did win election. He did win his first election, but he did. As you look back and look what he did, had he not done all that, I think the United States would have been in a lot poorer position. There wouldn't be a South Korea as we know it. There would have been a lot of dead Americans on the beaches of Japan. We would have lost the Cold War. And he integrated, only president that had dared to integrate the armed forces. That would have been terrible had that not happened when he did. So he was a good president, but he had a checkered past and he had a checkered present. And after he left office, people were glad to see him leave.
It's very interesting parallel. He is Victor Davis Hanson, National Review columnist, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, author of the new book, The Second World Wars, How the First Global Conflict Was Fought and Won. VDH, thanks so much for joining us. As usual, appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.